It used to be that one of the earliest indicators that Christmas was upon us was the appearing of lights. Lights on trees, lights in candles in the windows. It's not so much anymore. Now you got to go to Walmart in October and you know that Christmas is nearly upon us. But outside of the retail industry, one of the earliest indicators is lights. And there's a reason for that. Because the lights aren't just pretty. They don't just make a nice scene for us to drive by and look at the wonderful Christmas lights. They're symbolic. They represent something. As a matter of fact, here's what John, who's writing about the coming of Jesus in the very first chapter of the Gospel of John, has to say about Jesus. He says, the one, speaking of Jesus, who is the true light, who gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. When we see those lights on trees, the candles in the window, it reminds us that the light has come. One of the greatest realities about Christmas is this. Christmas brought light to the darkness. Christmas brought light to the darkness. Now, there are times when we prefer darkness to light. If you're having a romantic dinner, you like to have the lights turned down and the candles on the table. If you're going to a movie, it's better when the lights are dark and you're in the theater, you can see the screen. Sometimes when you're going to sleep at night, I know people that need it almost nearly pitch black, but we prefer the lights off, we prefer it dark. But most of the time, darkness isn't preferred. When you say something like, I'm in the dark, it means that you lack understanding, you're confused, you're disoriented. Darkness, there's a lot of people who are afraid of the dark. Darkness can make us feel uncomfortable. And the world in which Jesus came some 2,000 years ago, it was a dark place. There was political oppression, there was religious oppression, there was poverty, there was homelessness, there was violence, there was injustice. There was all kind of things happening, and really our world today isn't a whole lot different. Oh, we may be more sophisticated. We may have more modern technologies and feel like we're above those things, but really when you look beneath the surface of the flash that we have, our world is still a dark place. In the Bible, when it talks about darkness, it talks about deeds of darkness. Things like lying, stealing, acts of cruelty, gossip, slander, dishonesty, even death. They're all called acts of darkness, deeds of darkness. But there's also people who live in darkness because their life just doesn't seem very bright. Somebody who goes to bed hungry every night. Somebody who's homeless. Somebody who endures the darkness of a prison cell. There's the darkness maybe of being a single parent. The darkness of an abandoned child. The darkness of a couple who doesn't have a child. The darkness of a lonely widow who is at a home all by himself or herself. There's a lot of ways in which darkness can infiltrate our lives. There's the darkness of a young boy in maybe a third world country where it's just being torn apart by war. And his darkness is the fear of seeing the people that he loves murdered and raped, and fearful that these soldiers will come into his village and grab him by the scruff of the neck and say, you're either going to join the ranks of a child as a child soldier, or we're going to kill you. And his darkness is deep. But then there's also the darkness within. The darkness that sometimes people battle internally. Hatred, selfishness, not caring, treating others in disdainful ways. The darkness within of abuse of alcohol, addiction to drugs. There's a darkness all over the place. But make no mistake, there is a darkness in the world, and we cannot overcome it on our own. I don't care how hard you try. I don't care how good you think you are. There's a darkness in all of us that we cannot overcome on our own. So I want to look at a couple verses from the book of Isaiah. Now, Isaiah was a prophet, and his name actually means God is salvation. Isaiah talks about salvation more than anyone else in all the Old Testament. He just talks about it over and over of all the Old Testament prophets. And one way that he talks about salvation is being a light in the darkness. And so in the 8th chapter of Isaiah, he's talking about the world being this dark place. And he touches on this realization that we cannot overcome the darkness on our own, because when we do, it makes things worse. Here's what he has to say. He says, then they, the people, will look toward the earth. When it says that, it means they're going to look towards themselves. We're made of the stuff of earth. They're going to look to themselves and see only distress and darkness and fearful gloom. And they will be thrust into utter darkness. When we try to get out of the darkness on our own, ultimately it just gets darker. It gets darker, it gets worse, and we feel like we are walking in this deep darkness. But then Isaiah says, here's the wonderful hope. God is not going to let you stay in the darkness. Here's what he says in the next chapter. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. Here's what we need to remember from that. It doesn't say from them a light has shone. It says on them. The light that God offers isn't from us. We cannot dispel the darkness on our own. It doesn't come from the goodness of mankind. It doesn't come from our efforts. It doesn't come from self-enlightenment. It doesn't come when humanity somehow rises to a point of great understanding. The light is external, and it shines upon them. It shines upon you, and it shines upon me. And so God looked and said, I am going to send a light to them, on them, that it would light their world in a way that they've never understood before. And so here's what Jesus says about himself. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. The only way for us to get out of the darkness in our lives is the light of Christ. It's the only way. There's no other way. We can't do it on our own, and we all have darkness in our lives. Now, light does a few things. The first thing that happens is this. Light brings life. In the natural, if the sun ceased to shine, life on earth would cease to exist. We need light for life. We would have no life without the sun, and the only true life we have is the light of Christ. It brings true life, meaningful life, lasting life, eternal life, purpose to life. The light of Jesus replaces our dead lives with spiritual life and purpose. But the next thing that light does is this. Light brings truth. Light brings truth. It reveals things to us. Have you ever tried to drive at night without your headlights? It's not a very wise thing to do. Most of the time, if you do that, you're going to end up in a ditch or in a tree or in a car accident of some way. Why? Because you can't see where you're going. But when you turn your lights on, now you know, now you understand. You see the curves in the road. It reveals the potholes. It reveals the deer that's about to jump out in front of you. And you can adjust accordingly. When the light of Jesus comes, it reveals things to us. It brings understanding. It helps us to realize the things in our lives that are off kilter. It helps us to see the things that need to change. The light of Jesus, when it shines, it brings understanding of both who God is and who God wants us to be. And the third thing that happens when we step into the light is this. Light brings joy. Light brings joy. I know people who have lived in areas where they get very little sunshine. It may be because it's cloudy and overcast all the time. It may be because it's so far north or so far south that there are times of the year where they only get a few hours of sunlight. But here's one thing that they found. They've done studies. And people who live in those kind of environments, there are high levels of depression. High levels of depression. Because we need light to have joy. We need light to bring lightness to us. But more than that, light also, the joy of light brings beauty. Do you know that darkness is the absence of light? But in light, in one beam of light, all the colors of the spectrum are there. We just can't see them. But there is beauty in light. There is beauty in the things that we see. That's why in the book of James, you have to understand the only true beauty and joy is in the light. That's why in the book of James, chapter 1, verse 17, it says, every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights. We don't have joy. We can't see beauty. without the light of Jesus. The light of Jesus offers us joy that nothing else can compare to. Not pleasure, not power, not prosperity. The joy in the light of Jesus is different than anything else. So here's my question for you. And I want you to think about this. Where is the darkness in your life? Because we all have darkness in our lives. We may be walking in darkness because we don't know who Jesus is, or it may be that darkness that we wrestle with internally. But we all have darkness. The question is not, please hear me, I'm not going to let you out so easy. The question is not, do you have darkness or don't you have darkness? Most of us say, oh, I don't have darkness. Here's the answer, you do. The question is, do you want to deal with it? The question is, do you want to deal with the darkness inside of you? Or are you more comfortable staying in the darkness? Do you want to step into the light where you can see? Do you want to step into the light where those things are revealed in you and to you? Or is it more comfortable to stay in the darkness? Because it is comfortable. It's convenient. If you stay in the darkness long enough, eventually your eyes grow accustomed to it. Have you ever been in a dark room for a long time and then stepped into a bright room? It hurts. Your eyes hurt. It takes a while to adjust now to the brightness. And so often I think when the light shines, we stay into the darkness because, there's just things I don't want to see, and there's things I don't want anyone else to see. So speaking of Jesus, one of the most famous verses in all the Bible is John 3:16. Most of us stop there. But in John 3:19, here's what it says. God's light came into the world, but people love the darkness more than the light, for their actions were evil. Are you more comfortable staying in the darkness? So you don't have to deal with the you that you hope nobody else sees. So you don't have to deal with those things in your life, those secret things that you hope nobody else knows about. Are you more comfortable in the darkness? Because you don't want to have to adjust some things in your life when you step into the light and when the light of Jesus shines in your life. See, Jesus came to shine light in the darkness. Wherever there is darkness in your life, Christ has come to be the light. He's come to be the light. You don't have to celebrate this Christmas with those dark things in your life. Yes, he shines the light, but he doesn't shine the light to cause us pain, but to bring healing. He doesn't shine the light to condemn, but to save. He doesn't shine the light to embarrass us, but to make us whole. That is why Jesus came. He says, I want to shine the light so you don't ever, ever, ever have to walk in darkness. Here's what Jesus said. I have come into the world as light so that whoever believes in me may not remain in darkness. You do not have to stay in the darkness. The most amazing promise of Christmas is that Jesus came to shine a light in the darkness. I don't care how dark your life seems, Jesus can shine a light in it. You don't have to live in that darkness. You may say, I've tried time and time again. You don't have to live in the darkness. That is the hope of Christmas. Throughout this whole series, we've talked about this one truth. Christmas really did change everything. It brought those who were far near. It brought freedom to the captives. It brought hope to the hopeless. It allowed those who were lost to be found. And I want you to hear tonight, Christmas changed everything because it shines light in the darkness.